I hope you don't mind. I'm wearing your merch. I hope you don't mind.
Of course not. Thank you.
I picked it up in Portugal last year. When was it last year? No, the year before. Sorry, in 2022, when Emperor played at Vag's Metal Fest, was the first time that Emperor had ever played in Portugal. So sold out shows.
Yeah, yeah. I remember it. That was a good show.
Yeah, it
Yeah,
was great way to finish off the festival. I had a great time. It was a great experience. My first time seeing you guys play. So one for
cool.
the ages. So I had to take a souvenir with me, so I would always remember that great evening.
Brilliant. Glad you liked it.
Yeah, I did. I did. But enough of that. Let's talk about this new record because there's a lot to talk about when it comes to this new record. Uh,
Hmm.
the first thing that I thought when I listened to the album was, what were you thinking when you decided to put a record like this together? What was the light bulb? How was the light bulb moment for you that took you to where we currently are with an album of this magnitude?
Well, the core ideas are really simple at the heart of it. So, really, since the beginning of my solo career, I've always kind of sketched out these kind of mood boards of write-ups, of what kind of sounds and what kind of lyrical elements and the kind of milieu, if you can call it that, of the entire album. And usually comes to me as like an instinct. Like it did, at the risk of sounding like a madman, but it's like an idea for an album usually comes as a collective whole, like an instinctual feeling of what kind of album I'm going to make, what it will feel like, and then it's like trying to piece together, the different elements that goes into that, uh, that can make a representation of that initial instinct. And I mean, if you're familiar with my solo records, it's some of them are kind of down the center, and some are more experimental to either one side or the other. And previously, before the pandemic, I did these kind of uh, opposing EPs, you could say. Yeah, where one was very traditional, one was very much more experimental and indie-like. So I think when I got back to writing this record, I still wanted to kind of follow the same procedure in the sense of having one foot in, my comfort zone and another foot in chaos. But that's kind of the borderline, where I feel, I do my best work. And since I've been doing these kind of experiments, and it was a long time since I last did a full length, I wanted to kind of go down the center, like not back to, I don't like to say like back to the roots or anything, but I mean, black metal, vocals, distorted guitars, all of that is kind of always like a core element of what I do because it's my most fluent way of expressing myself. And arguably, these influences I've had to kind of bring orchestral slash soundtrack like sounds as layers to my music is kind of something that goes back to the beginning. And so really, I just want to take what, on paper is kind of like my go-to sounds and scenarios, like very down the center of what I'm doing, but try to take those elements, subjectively, in just for me and elevate them to something that I've never done before. So at the heart of this are very, like a very traditional story with very traditional archetypes. Their, instrumentation is very typical. It's like, typical 5-piece black metal band, and the orchestrations are done with a very typical classic symphony orchestra. So it's not like a hybrid orchestra kind of thing with synthesizers and everything. It's just like very old school, and it's all really inspired by, especially the orchestral parts was very inspired by the early orchestral music of soundtracks from Jerry Goldsmith, Bernard Herrmann, John Williams, all these that was kind of my gateway into to orchestral music to start with. And as part of that challenge, as I said, like wanting to take stuff that I know, but to use them in a way that I haven't done before, then the idea to from the get-go, like one of the core ideas was like, okay, I'll present the music in two different forms. It's going to be exactly the same music, and literally just do a black metal album, do orchestrations, so that support the metal production, but to arrange it in such a way that if you take all the metal parts away, the orchestrations will function as its own individual thing. That was the core idea.
Which one of the two turned out to be harder to achieve? Was it the metal version, because obviously it's more texturized, has more complexity to it, or was the orchestral side?
But the thing is, I wrote both of them at the same time.
Oh, okay.
So since I knew that it all had to fit together and it had to work separately, I literally just did almost like a charcoal sketch of the music, and it's been confusing in those who got the newsletter from the label and everything, that it started with a piano sound, and people assume that I've been playing this stuff on the piano. I wish, but no, it's really just like a way of sketching the music, like a short score, as it's called. For maybe some of your viewers are familiar, but it's really just to don't you don't take any decision on what kind of sound. But you're going to have bass lines, and then there's a piano sound on the track in your sequencer, and as you go along, you have one track for the bass parts, one track for the chordal parts, one track for the melody, one track from the counter melody, one track for embellishments and kind of rhythmical stuff, and you kind of sketch out the music like that, and make sure that the voicings uh, are functioning as they should. And then when you kind of have the core composition, then you can kind of color it in. So I was then you know assigning those bass lines to a bass guitar, but I will also assign them to contrabassoons and cellos and contrabasses. And it's in a similar way I would apply the chordal structures to guitars, but also to strings or woodwinds, or so it's so it all, and also since the arrangement, people also confuse this as, since it's two different versions, that I did an orchestral version of the metal music, but the whole orchestral album is exactly the same stems and recordings as is on the metal record. No more, nothing less.
You just took the other pieces out.
Yeah. It's literally just the orchestrations, and then mixed by another mixer.
It's just one of the layers that was part of the multi-layers that was on the other record.
Yeah. Yes, true.
When you talked about creativity and your solo stuff, in terms of sometimes going down the middle, sometimes going a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right. How much of that freedom to be creative, to be able to go beyond that middle and really push the edges, comes from the legacy that you've built over the years?
I think it's just my natural instinct to that's what excites me. It's, and not, I mean, some people have also you know assume that I do things in for shock value, or to kind of provoke my listeners or anything. It's never about that. It's since the beginning. And I mean, now early Emperor and the stuff that I did when I was a teenager. As a matter of fact, In the Nights of Eclipse is 30 years old today. It was released 30 years ago today. And I mean, but people tend to forget that we were teenagers. I was 17 when we recorded the Eclipse, and I was already trying to kind of push beyond what I knew was possible. And I'm not saying that that I did anything amazing with it, but my instinct to to kind of, have the music that I loved and then try to push it further is how I started out. And it's kind of how I continued. It's not like I did something traditional at the time, because at the time it wasn't traditional. It wasn't a thing. It's only now that people think it's a traditional thing. So I've been kind of just trying to put myself in a position where I'm super excited about making music. And I've said this so many times in the press round for this, like, I have no consideration for how people will perceive my music when I write it. It's only my and I say this from experience too. I mean, the only thing I can do is to put myself in a position where I'm just as excited, or perhaps even more so, the enthusiastic and kind of fired up about making another album. I never want this to be boring. I always want to have challenges, and this is of course besides the point for the listener, but for me, you know I'm I'm 48. I've been doing this for a while, and it's important to me to not only to create new music but also to learn more things. And I can say that's from the kind of the biggest kind of gratifying element of making this kind of project was the learning part, all the stuff that I had to learn about orchestration and that I got to study in the process, and technical aspects, everything. I added so much to my creative toolbox from this project, so that makes me super excited to make the next record. And those are the parameters. Those are the only parameters I can kind of go by. And that may sound very selfish, but and it's hard to explain, but it really has nothing to do with ego or prestige or anything. It's feeding the passion, on the personal level. And fortunately, over the years, people have enjoyed my experiments and my journey, and what I put out there to such an extent that I get to continue. And for that, I'm very, very fortunate.
When you approach music like the way you did on this record, uh, I get the feeling that you're doing it as you're the number one fan of yourself. So like if you please yourself as a fan of what you're doing, you feel like you're on the right track of whatever it is that you want to achieve. I
Well,
don't
when you put it like that, that sounds even more more bad. But
no,
yeah,
but
yeah,
I don't mean that
yeah.
as a bad thing.
No, but it's true. I mean, it's not a matter of there's almost like the first step in developing good taste is to start to trust your own opinion, which is super hard, because myself, unfortunately slash unfortunately, that a lot of my colleagues that I talk to, who I admire for their skills and whatnot, we all face imposter syndrome. We're all staring into the blank page, so to speak, before making another album. It never gets any easier, but for it to be easy was never the case. You don't want to do this because it's easy. You do this because you want to have that experience. And I think it becomes, of course, personal in the sense that you could kind of connect with creativity as like a universal thing. But then, of course, whatever you channel is, we're all kind of, as artists, I think, like distorted lenses. The same idea will not sound the same, through different people. And I was very fortunate to experience this also with my own ideas. I mean, I said I do all these write-ups, like color schemes and like visual ideas and references and textural lines, musical texture, all these kinds of things. And I kind of I share all of this material with everyone who's working on the record, whether that's someone who plays the violin, or Costin, or or Sean, who's been doing the videos and everything, and they all kind of get access to the same source material. And if you've, I know, I'm not sure if you've seen it, but if you've seen, the artwork of the album, and you've seen Costin Cherno's animations for the orchestral album, and then see the visuals from Loki filmed from the music videos, it's entirely different interpretations and kind of it's through their distorted lenses, so to speak. But you could still you still see the horns, you see the stags, you see it's a different representation, but it kind of comes from the same sort. It still feels cohesive, at least to me. Maybe that's just me, but that's the beauty of it. I mean, it's not like any of us have the blueprint for what's the right way to do it. We just try to do it the best that we can through our own distorted lens, and that's what makes it unique. It's like I admire so many artists, but it's not that it's kind of futile for me to try to sound like them. I will just have to try to sound like me, as in a similar way that they sound like them.
And
Am
I
I
think
making any sense here?
yeah, you are,
I
because
feel...
I feel like the same applies to the listener, because depending on what kind of personal baggage or emotional baggage you have currently, when you sit down to listen to a record, the impact of that record is going to be completely different than if you listen to the record 5 days before, a year after, whatever the case might be.
Totally. And it's, I think it's a scientific fact too, that the music that we attach our experiences to and that we listen to, I think is between 17 and 25, something like that. It does something to you, like the connections in your brain kind of thing. So this is and as you say, it depends on where you are, and that's the most important thing. This is also, I mean, again with the press release and everything, it's quite obvious that there's a storyline behind everything. But as I've said, it's not important for me that people understand my story. I'm not I'm not a writer, but I wanted a backbone for this to feel like a story. It's like an imaginary soundtrack to a story. But people, I have a very clear view and interpretation of the story I made and why I put the things in there that I did. But it's not important for me to superimpose that on the listener. I want them to have their own experience and their own interpretation of this, in a similar way that I personally also enjoy making up my own opinion about how an album makes me feel. And I think put like, if you exaggerate, I mean, as an artist, if you have too much of a like specified objective to how your listeners are supposed to feel and what they're supposed to understand, is it art or is it propaganda? It's
A
just
fine
like,
line.
yeah, it's a fine line.
It's a very fine line. This actually takes me to my next point, because listening to the record, I felt, for me, the sound of the album is what impacted me before the vocals, before the lyrics. I was mesmerized by the sound. I listened to the metal version first, then I went to the orchestral version, then I went back to the metal version. I took that kind of approach. So the sound to me is what spoke to me, even if it didn't have any words. But it also made me wonder how the lyrical process went for you, because it felt like the sound was speaking without words, and then the words just emphasize what the sound was saying. Is that the approach that you took writing the lyrics for this record?
Well, thank you so much. That's very kind of you. It's that's quite a compliment. But honestly, when I played the album when it was finished, and I played it to friends and colleagues and everything, without any information, just like, here's the music, and so many kids, they went in blind, so to speak, and so many of them came back like, I feel like I'm watching a movie, you
Yeah.
know, which is exactly what I intended, in that sense, that that feeling of cohesiveness. And yes, I wrote this kind of synopsis for a novel. Like, it's not like a proper full-blown thing. It's just like basic feeling, and then I kind of wrote the lyrics as, chronological scenes, in this traditional Joseph Campbell style story, where I put my, of course, preferred symbolism and effects into it. But this gave me an opportunity to, of course, with kind of different experience of my protagonist and this how the story goes. It gave me an opportunity to also explore typical, movie soundtrack elements, or if you have, Wagner, I think, invented this more or less, with, or at least made it a thing with leitmotifs, that you have themes that follow characters or events. And so throughout the album, there are reoccurring motives. There are, certain chord progressions that may, you know, uh, you know, turn up in other songs, small details here and there that kind of represent things in the story. It was just like very, very interesting for me to have that backbone, like a scaffolding to build the album around, and hopefully create this sense of cohesion, from beginning to end. I'm not saying it's not necessary to have a chronological narrative to do that, but it's important for me to, probably because of the generation I grew up in terms of albums, I want them to feel like one thing, not just like a collection of songs.
I'm with you on that 100%. Nothing bugs me more than when I listen to an album that's supposed to be an album and it comes across as a compilation. Like
Yeah, yeah.
I need, like, for me to resonate with the record experience, I need the record to I don't need the record to be linear in its format, because I look at an album the same way I look at being on a train. And every time you look outside of a window, you see a different scenery, but you're still on that same train
Mm,
ride. The train hasn't changed, neither have the tracks. It's just your
yeah,
vision of what you're seeing is constantly changing. I want my albums to be like that.
me too. And it's just a preference. It's probably because of generation,
Yeah.
of now, young kids, they listen to more their own playlist. They're putting together their own kind of mood boards of music and everything. But uh, I still like to think that there's room for this, because it's also before albums, like the format of a concert, like a symphony. It's a longer piece of music that you kind of go on a journey. You know, sometimes you have to read a novel. You can't only read the memes.
That is very true. I have to ask you about a specific song on the record, "Blood Trades to Love." I felt like your vocals on that track went went to a different place, like maybe more emotional, maybe a little bit more free, a little more vulnerable, maybe. That song vocally hit me different from anything else on the record. Is there something specific about that song that maybe gave me that sort of different experience?
I'm not sure. You're probably a better judge of that than me. No, for me, this is just trying to portray, making the musical elements that to portray that part of the story where my protagonist, you know, comes, finds love, but maybe he's not in a place to either be loved or express love. It's a quite tragic story,
Yeah.
as the music might imply.
Yes, I was just gonna say that. The music paints a very vivid picture of that sort of emotion and that sort of feeling.
And I also kind of like the juxtaposition that it just the title implies. Blood trails to love. It kind of implies that it's passionate, but it's not necessarily, you know uh, a happy thing.
I have
And also, like at the ending, like at the heart of all things broken. There's the wordplay of, broken heart within the title. So
everything kind of goes full circle. I have one last question for you, and that is, whenever we talk about your music, either be with Emperor or your solo stuff, there's always a word that gets associated, and that is nostalgia. Do you find nostalgia to be the enemy of creativity?
No, not really. I think it's, we all have our references, and again, um, I think again, the things that we are attached to, the music that we grew up on and everything. Of course, those become, colors of how we perceive things. We carry with us all, good and bad that happens for us and to us and everything, and they inevitably becomes part of what you are and what you express. And but for me personally, I'm a full understanding of people who have like a nostalgic feeling to older music. I said, and for me that would be Emperor, from my own creative past. And some people have a very strong emotional, attachment to that music since, long ago. And in a similar way that I have that to some of my favorite albums from growing up. And I think it's a beautiful thing. But I think possibly, and I've pondered this, possibly because I was quite young when we started Emperor, and I was only 25 when we called it quits. Still, looking back, still relatively young. And since then, very quickly people started becoming nostalgic about Emperor, as a phenomenon. So I think, and always personally, I felt that I was just starting out, just scratching the surface of what I wanted to do creatively. And so I do appreciate that other people are, but which is also kind of, but naturally too. I mean, I'm not very nostalgic about Emperor and the good old days and whatever, because I'm exactly where I want to be now. So there's so many people who kind of be nostalgic on my behalf, if that makes sense. I don't have to be. I'm a nostalgic. I can be nostalgic about other things, but when it comes to music, it's I'm always about the next step. That it's just like, it's not always charming, but it's just like this intense. It's an addiction, kind of.
It is.
Yeah,
It's
but
an interesting thing because I used to talk to my dad before he passed away about things that he was nostalgic about, and then sometimes I would have to remind him that, yeah, but you used to complain about this, this, and this, and this from that time period or from whatever. When you're nostalgic, you tend to about something specifically, you tend to just filter out all the good stuff, and you kind of forget about all the bad stuff. But that also doesn't allow you to live in the present and look forward to what's ahead
hmm,
of you. It's kind of there is positives to it, but if you're not careful about it, you start to embrace a lot of things that comes with negativity with it at the same time. It's a tricky situation.
yeah, it is. But I think if you, of course, we all. It's like if you go you mentioned the train. If you go on a vacation or some kind of trip, you know, of course there are all the hours on the train or on the plane and everything, but you don't remember those moments. You remember the exciting stuff. So you kind of bring, as I say, it's easy to filter out all that was bad. But I think if we can appreciate, that we had those experiences and that was a representation of where we were and all that. And as long as you're happy where you are, as you said, the problem is when people are not satisfied where they are and they go, oh, it was much better before.
Yeah.
You know, I'd like to see like good things was before. I'm up for more good things.
There's room for more good stuff in the future.
Yeah, but don't tell anyone. This is very non-black metal. I'm just kidding.
That is so true. That is.
No, but no, but seriously, I think uh, this whole, what as artists, when you get to do this, as such a big part of your life, uh, and you could see that if people are super successful in anything, I'm not saying I am, but like in general, some people are rich beyond, measure, from some kind of passion, that they work on, but they never stop, you know the results of the consequence of that was never the driving force. You know, why would someone like Bill Gates, why would he continue working if like money was or fame or anything was the objective? You know, it's because they have a passion. That's what, and that kind of keeps driving how people define this success and everything. And I've seen this from, you know, from a very interesting perspective myself, in the sense that people tend to forget how people absolutely frowned upon the early Emperor records outside the very, very minimal underground, you know, people who were fans of that kind of extreme music. You know, the major metal community absolutely ridiculed, you know, the first couple of Emperor albums. And then after the fact, you know, so some years passed, and you know, some of these records are now revered for being important for some kind of purpose within that time frame and what have you. And so for me, it's like this was an early experience of like, it was never about what we made. It was always about what people wanted it to be. When they wanted it to be like the ridiculous and stupid, you know, that's what it was to them. And you know, speaking in general terms of the public now, and when they decided this is something, you know, successful or worthwhile, then that's what they decided it to be. The albums are exactly the same, you know. So and you can never be in sync with that.
That is,
unfortunately.
yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. That's what a great way to finish this conversation. I mean, I could go on for hours talking to you about music and your music. It's so delightful to pick your brain and understand where this creativity comes from. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much for the support. I mean, I've been doing a lot of press for this record, which I'm very fortunate, but I feel sometimes like all this makes sense in my head. Sometimes I kind of take a step aside, but like people just shaking their heads right now, because it seems like a lot of rambling, and maybe it becomes too abstract and metaphysical. I don't know, but
I think it
it
was a
is what it is.
wonderful. I think it was a wonderful conversation. From you, was very helpful in my own way of digesting the record to understand a little bit more about it and how it came about. I wish you nothing but the best. I'm coming to Norway to
Thank you, and
Inferno.
likewise.
I'm going to be in Norway this March for Inferno. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that somehow we cross paths and I get to see you in person. Would be a pleasure. I know Norway is not a small country by no means, but I hope that somehow we cross paths. Would be an absolute pleasure.
Absolutely. It's very unlikely that I will be at Inferno, because we're touring with and having other projects this year. So, but and to be honest, if I'm not playing somewhere, I have a tendency to just stay here in the comfort of my home in Telemark.
Honestly,
But let's have a coffee someday if we if our
someday we'll have a
paths
coffee and
cross.
we'll talk in person. Will be my pleasure. And I don't blame you. Sometimes I just want to be in the comfort of my home with my pets and enjoy a little bit of solitude.
Oh, I know all about that.
Thank you very much. All the best.
You too. Thanks.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.